directors. We are using a different format tonight than usual. Normally when we have our committee meetings, we set up tables and we sit around the tables. But we just had a fresh paint job in the council chambers, finished today, just earlier today. So, and I think that, I'm not sure if that's what caused the technical difficulties, but anyway, it seemed like it was going to be much better if we had the committee members sit up on the dais and the presenters would sit down here at the testimony table. So I hope that works for everybody. We are broadcasting this tonight, and so it's going out on Channel 4, and also it's available on our lincolncity.org website under video for this particular meeting, and you can find that and stream that anytime. We are at sort of the end of a process of planning for an area of about 200 acres in Nelscott. We started this a couple years ago. We got a grant from the Transportation and Growth Management Program for the state of Oregon, and we have with us this evening David Helton, who is our contract hand, and we really have appreciated his work over this time. So we expected a shorter timetable for this project. And we started it, we got the grant, I believe, in 2014, and generally it takes about a year before it actually gets off the ground. We started the project in 2015. We had a design week charrette in October, I believe, of 2015. And basically came up with the plan that we wanted for this these underdeveloped and developing areas in Nelscott, most of which lies on the east side of the highway. Then we were kind of waylaid in the spring, just about the time when we thought we were wrapping up, because we ran into a snag with ODOT. One of the features of this new plan was a frontage lane, a slip lane, sort of like the one in front of the Nelscott Strip businesses. And we, our designer, Lawrence Kumar, thought that was such a charming idea, and that we should repeat it on the east side of the highway. As it turns out, ODOT did not like that design. They thought that it would cause stacking up of cars trying to make that turn onto the slip lane off the highway, and they were concerned that it would just add to our congestion problems. So we scrapped that plan, and fortunately our creative consultants came up with an equally good design. So you are going to be hearing about that tonight. And with that, I want to introduce Lawrence Kumar. He's our architect and town planner on the project. Kirsten Green is our lead planner on this project. She is with Kogan Owens and Green, and I hope you remember Kirsten. And is there anyone else? Yes. Pardon? Yes, Bonnie is over here. She's our economist. She was here at the beginning of the project, and we haven't seen her for a long time, so it's nice to have her back. And Rich Catlin is with Reese and Associates Engineers. So we have quite a few members of our team, and yes. So also I want to do other introductions at the dais. This is our advisory committee. Are you part of the advisory committee? I believe you are. So yes, and they're looking a little lonely up there. We actually have on the committee, we've had a nice group, a wonderful group of community members who have been representing various organizations around town, and so we have 4 of them here tonight, but there are more, and I'm hoping that they are staying tuned and will make sure that they understand the changes that we've made now in the plan since the last time we had a meeting. So on the dais, do you want to introduce yourselves and who you represent?
I'll go ahead. I'm Pam Barlow Lind. I'm the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians Tribal Planner.
Thank you.
Lori Arsatorres, Executive Director of the Lincoln City Chamber.
Allison Robertson, Lincoln City Urban Renewal Agency. Judy Casper, Nell Scott Neighborhood Association.
All right, thank you. And Judy's become a city councilor since we started this project, too. But she's wearing her neighborhood association hat tonight, right, Judy?
Right.
Okay. In the audience, we don't have microphone ability out here, so I might just have to, oh, Kirsten does. Do you want to take around the mic?
I'm Jim Nordell. I represent Lincoln 44 LLC. We have 44 of the 200 acres in the study.
Dick Anderson, City Council, Lincoln City.
Lila Bradley, Public Works Director.
You can go again. Double dip.
David Helton, ODOT.
Deanna Hinton, City Council, Lincoln City.
Ken Beamer, property owner, Nell Scott.
And then, Richard, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Richard Townsend, Planning Director for Lincoln City.
And I should mention that our project management team for this project included Richard, Planning Director, and Lila, Public Works Director, Stephanie Reed, our City Engineer, and Allison was also, she's wearing multiple hats tonight also. Okay, so I would like now to turn it over to Kirsten, and she will begin her presentation on how this plan has evolved.
Thanks, and if it's okay, I'll stand. I wonder if there's a remote clicker, and if not, I can just kind of upside down here. Sure, Bonnie, that'd be awesome.
Here, let's get this.
Okay. Well, thank you for having us back. Thank you for your patience. Nell Scott is an amazing area, very near and dear to my heart. It's been a pleasure to work on it. Kind of existing Nell Scott and the potential new Nell Scott neighborhoods of the future on the east side. So we're pleased to be back and appreciate everyone's patience as we worked out the technical concerns that ODOT had, and are pleased to present a revised diagram to you tonight. So if there's a down click, Bonnie, you could hit that. So just this will look actually quite a bit like what you saw a year ago. So a lot of it is a recap, and then when we get to the new part, Lawrence will take you through that. But you have 3 memos sent to you about a week ago for your review, and we just changed the pieces that had to do with basically the local access lane and the new land use and transportation diagram. The body of the work, not a tremendous amount had changed. So the tech memo, we lovingly call them 4, has to do with the transportation improvements, 5 has to do with the funding strategies, and 6 has to do with the kind of plan implementation and built environment form. So we definitely, tonight is about hearing from you. So at any given time, please just jump in, Project Advisory Committee members, and also members of the community. We've had a chance to meet with several of the property owners of the room before tonight's meeting, so appreciate you guys coming out and over for that. Next slide, please. So, in fact, you can click through these too. Just to recap on that, they're animated, so if you click one more time. Thank you. So this was our vision we worked on together. So in 2045, Nell Scott has developed both east and west of the highway and neighborhoods that are well-connected, economically vibrant, and attractive. The vision Highway 101 is no longer a dividing line, but has become the heart of Nell Scott in itself. It's a welcoming tourist environment, which it is today, so continue to amplify that on the east side, and a pleasant home for year-round residents. Development honors the natural assets in the area. We'll talk about Baldy Creek and some of the other creek systems today, and builds on them to create value for property owners and tenants. Residents enjoy opportunities for lifelong learning at the Oregon Coast Community College and Lincoln City Public Schools. I believe that's Lincoln County Public Schools, yes. Students are able to travel safely to the campus by walking, biking, taking transit, and driving. So that's the vision in 2045. So this is definitely long-range planning, this being 2017. So this is kind of a 30-year build-out vision of both sides of the highway, and as Deb has said previously, it brings a positive redundancy to Lincoln City if there's ever a major Cascadia event, provides some kind of upland development. to help with the resiliency factor. Next slide, please, Bonnie. Thank you so much. So these are the goals. These are in your early tech memo. So in 2015, we worked on these together, but the goals are around lifelong learning, livability, and housing. We heard this so robust, and you live with it every day, the shortage of workforce housing and affordable housing in Nelscott. And so anything to do to be able to bring that additional development to bear will be a positive for both people living here, but also businesses trying to recruit new staff. Recreation and health, a major focus. So you hear a lot about bicycle and pedestrian paths, spaces for living and walking this afternoon. Economy, major emphasis, transportation choice. So again, providing alternate routes to 101 in the case of congestion, so residents can get to and through by walking and biking and transit, as well as the individual automobile. Recognizing the heritage of the Siletz Indian tribe, Native American tribe here, and also the inclusion of Latino community and other diverse community members as Lincoln City continues to grow and redevelop over time. And then uplifting the ecology and natural resources of the Nelscott area, which is so special, reaching from ocean to the forest. So rare in Oregon. So this is an opportunity for Lawrence to tell you a little bit about the illustrative diagram, and this one has more detail. David might be surprised why I still have this in the PowerPoint, but this one has more detail than you would probably see in the final plan. As we've met with property owners today, though, some of this fine-grained network that is depicted here is only for property owners' sort of use and guidance. It wouldn't be codified in the plan that this is exactly how it would be. This is a level of specifics that is more often included with a master plan. And you have several property owners in the room and in the study area that might want to, develop out a little bit differently. And when we lift up from the illustrative plan to kind of the more skeleton framework, you see what are the necessary road infrastructure that would be kind of the bare bones. But this provides detail that some property owners have said is welcome for them because it kind of advances their own plans for their properties with the talents of urban designer Lawrence Kamar here. So Lawrence, could you give an overview, if you would? Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to be speaking about some things about fundamental ideas and principles about what makes a neighborhood that provides for all of those issues and concepts that Kirsten just went through. So the first of them is that it's a walkable neighborhood. And what we mean by a walkable neighborhood is that there are connections. There are sidewalks alongside streets. There are pathways and trails. But there are also places to go. So people can live and work and shop and play and go to school and connect onto a regional trail perhaps, all within their neighborhood, within a 5-minute walk and then a 10-minute walk. And so you'll see these circles on the plan, these dotted in circles. There's one here, and then one that we placed over the existing Nelscott. And that is actually quite precisely a quarter mile from the center to the edge, and a full half mile from edge to edge. And we like to say that it takes about 5 minutes for the average person walking on a relatively flat or not overly contoured landscape, about 5 minutes to walk a quarter mile and 10 minutes to walk half of a mile. So that gives you a sense of dimension, and also that people will tend to walk, we find, through experience, that 5 minutes or that 10 minutes when it is a place that is safe, convenient, and interesting, attractive to walk in. You may not want to walk 10 minutes along parts of Highway 101 where it's, in between shopping centers and parking lots and a lot of traffic and trucks going by. But there are some portions of 101 through Lincoln City that are very nice and walkable. One of them happens to be, we're very benefited by having the Nelscott Strip. This is a great little example of a small little one-sided, in this case, Main Street. And it's the mere fact that you can pull off, park your car, and walk right into a shop that you can see as you're passing by. As Kirsten said, we were previously working with a similar kind of a concept on the front of this neighborhood with that kind of a slip lane idea. But we have other tricks in our bag. So instead of that slip lane, and this is how we've transitioned, it's really just an adjustment to the original plan. The same basic framework of streets and blocks that we had in the original plan that came out of the charrette is all still present here. It really is a small adjustment with the frontage idea. Instead of concentrating the idea of slipping off the road and circulating here, you simply come in a block and you have a two-sided street here that's about 200 feet away from the highway. But more of the emphasis now is placed on the perpendicular street, so that this can become sort of a main street. Whereas here it's directly on the face of the highway, here it simply becomes a perpendicular. And that there's a spacing of these streets now that we've approved, gotten a general approval from ODOT in terms of that spacing from the existing signalized intersection, I believe is here, to, and I can't remember, I'm not going to try, 32nd, 31st, I believe. I'm not going to go through all the numbers. That's 27th, I remember, and 23rd up here. So we've placed a couple of more streets in between those existing ones, and this spacing is now appropriate for the kind of circulation along the highway. And those become the ideal places where commercial would concentrate, not so much out on the face as much as coming in to a main street, perhaps there, or a main street that fits in here. So you enter into, there's this idea of a main street as being two-sided, that it's not just along the edge of a commercial strip. That a two-sided main street, I'm going to use my fingers like this with my microphone, is that these are the building walls, and this is the width of the street. And creating that kind of, we call it an outdoor room. So this kind of a main street, here or perhaps here, is an outdoor room that you see as you're passing by on the highway. You see in there, like there's nice buildings framing the view, looking into that main street, and you can see that there's activity and life, and storefronts they're spilling out onto a sidewalk. There might be cafe seating, restaurant seating coming out onto that sidewalk, but it's in a kind of a protected place. At the same time, there could be still some kind of openness of businesses, retail businesses, facing onto Baldy Creek, across a little greenway, across a bike path. So we still have in there a regional trail, a bike path, a bike and walking path that can run along here. But we don't have the conflicts of cars trying to get in and out of that. It would just be the bike path running along that whole edge. And the potential, again, for some retail to spill out facing onto that.
Lawrence, we should probably call that a shared use path, so it's bicycling, walking, and also emergency access. So it's quite a presence there against Baldy Creek for people to use as part of the Head to Bay Trail and down.
That's right. It's part of the whole Head to Bay Trail as a multi-use path. That's right. That could be used as emergency access as well. So that Head to Bay Trail would be able to run through here along Baldy Creek and then up into Spyglass, north of there. Let's see. Very important to mention again, something we had in the original plan, it's still there, is what we've called Foothills Boulevard, connecting from 32nd all the way up into Lee Street, I believe, is up here. So that becomes not a bypass, but a local street, a neighborhood street, which is running parallel several blocks up the hill, that provides this neighborhood a way to get around without every trip having to be going out only to the highway. So we've got a nice redundancy, a positive redundancy of east-west and north-south streets, creating a network like a web of opportunities in different ways and flexibility of ways to travel through the neighborhood. And that becomes a really critical backbone, that Foothills Boulevard, to that web.
Maybe we could go to the next image and look at the, if you could give PAC members and the listening audience an overview of what the colors are on the map.
Yes. And this is the same plan, but pulling out those streets. So that's to say that this would be the basic backbone, and then the colors representing three or four different zones. The red is and I want to get the terminology that we've established for this particular project, Vertical and horizontal mixed use, the red with the hatching in it. Village community in the kind of orange color. The lighter yellow is hillside residential. The purple is employment district, and then, of course, green for parks. So going back to the vertical and horizontal mixed use, this is where there could be retail shops on the ground floor, could be residences up above in a mixed-use building, or it could be horizontal mixed use, in which it's a one-story retail building and there's an apartment building or townhouses. But it's a relatively higher density kind of residential, and that would be concentrated around this center and this center, this kind of corridor up along the edge of the highway. As you rise up the hill, you see the orange areas here and throughout here. This is mostly residential then. It's not going to have, and that's the village community, not have as much of a retail component as primarily residential, but a higher density to medium density residential. And then finally, the lighter yellow up in the hills where it's further away is primarily single-family residential detached. I believe we said there could still be some duplexes mixed in with that, but it'll be on a little bit larger lot. So it's really a gradation of density and intensity of uses from the highway up the hills. And the employment is a place that, providing opportunities again for businesses that are established there already, that are running there, but also to be a place of work, more than just the retail level of work, but that small shops as well as larger businesses could concentrate back in here.
Just one note, I guess we should probably change the nomenclature on our green to get more specific. We labeled it all parks, but in some cases it's simply referring to National Wetlands Inventory or delineated wetlands or creek setbacks. So the only actual and specific park I think that shows up on the funding diagram is that center green there, which is in with the Lincoln 44 property and has always kind of been a plan of theirs, if I'm not misrepresenting, to provide some common open space for the community that they develop out there.
That's correct. Yeah. This is an interesting one in that it becomes kind of even though it's that designated wetland area, it forms a kind of a border to this neighborhood.
And gives it a hug.
A hug.
Do the planning project advisory committee members have any questions or comments? Because this is really kind of the new piece. Everything else from here on out will be a bit of review and just how it follows on. But questions or comments on this new diagram? Richard, should we start with you? How do you like how it's shaping up?
I like it a lot. I think the change in them moving a little bit off of 101 is very positive. We've long had the issue of 101 being our main commercial street, but also being a major through street for freight traffic and so on. And in the past, there had been the possibility of a bypass, but that's now, it was 50 years ago, and it might be 50 years in the future when we think about it again. In a way, it makes the existing 101 sort of the bypass of the commercial area in a sense. So I think it's a good idea.
Thanks. And I think just from a technical perspective, before we go on to the other project advisory committee members, David had said that ODOT, I think your transportation planning and analysis unit is okay with this revised plan. Is that right? That's affirmative from the back since he's not on mic. So thanks, David. Thank you for checking that. Pam, how does it look to you?
Well, my reaction to it is that it seems really consistent with the Lincoln City concept of the string of pearls through the community. And it builds on the concept of kind of a district that has an integrity within itself, the room concept, where it reminds me a bit of the Pearl District type of concept, or Nye Beach, which is also a small neighborhood area with a very vital commercial core to it.
Thank you. Great. Please, Lori, I know this is new for you.
It is fairly new. But, yeah, I'm sitting here trying to get a visual of exactly where we're at. So I'm wondering, it seems like a lot of land that you're including in this, and maybe I just don't have a good visual of exactly where that land is.
Sure.
But it's kind of going up the hill, and it is all buildable land.
the property owners have considered it buildable, so it's not always the same cost, of course, as you get up into the hill. It'd be more expensive to develop, and that's why that kind of lower intensity. Maybe, Lawrence, you could just note where the Morse Brothers property is to help orient Lori. So that's this here is the, I think it's a little lower than that. Just around yep, there you go. Yep.
In
that's
here.
the existing
There's
kind
the
of gravel.
line.
Yeah, excavation site.
And
And
there
then,
up.
there has been some interest in large format retail in that area, so we've been designing kind of some concepts around that might include liner buildings, et cetera. And then,
Maybe I could say a little more. Okay, so
Lawrence, could you share the mic just so that Deb's on that? Thank you.
this is the existing Nell Scott strip, okay? And then this is the new traffic control light. So as you're going this way, you can get to the high school this way, right? So this is a brand-new street that doesn't exist now. This portion of the street does, but we take off from there, and we go north and then connect way up and eventually connect to East Devils Lake Road. So this would be a great alternative way to get that far north. And let's see, what else can I point out that might be familiar? Besides the Morris excavation, then I'm sure you maybe you've never had the opportunity to go out on 23rd, but since you're the Chamber of Commerce director, I imagine you're going to be going out if you haven't already. So out here we have the FedEx, we have a couple car repair places, we have the impoundment lot, those kinds of heavier industrial type uses. So does that help you put this in perspective then?
Yeah,
and yes, it is a large area. Almost all of this part is within our urban growth boundary, but it's not in the city limits at this time. So this is actually county zoning at this time.
It's a great, really infill opportunity within the city, as Pam was kind of saying, kind of fleshing out a node, if you will, without expanding the UGB onto resource land. So,
Yeah, looks great.
thank you. Allison, how are you feeling about it?
I think it looks great. I for some reason it didn't connect until just now, Lawrence, when you described it, but the main kind of center of this plan reminds me of 51st Street being perpendicular to Highway 101. So that connection was kind of helpful for me. And I think, as I've mentioned earlier, my only concern about it really is the employment area being sufficient for the whole city and region, and then having residential abutting the employment area if there's light manufacturing or whatever is going on there. So, but I know there's a lot of topography, and with good planning you can do it well. So, so I think it looks good.
Thanks. I was asking Steve, my colleague who's had a chance to work for your city on the housing needs analysis and economic opportunities analysis of late, about this question, because we had a property owner come in to the property owner meetings right before who is living in a home there now, but last time they checked it was employment, so it was a surprise to them to see it shown as residential there in the yellow. And Steve reports, and Deb and Richard can probably check this, but that the city has a surplus of both residential and employment land. So it's probably a flexible choice for the city on how they want to. I don't think our consulting team feels terrifically strongly about how you zone that property, and you might, Deb, do you have an opinion about that on Mike?
Well, I would just say that all of this in here is, when we're talking about mixed use, we're not just talking about coffee shops. I mean, we are talking about, maybe even some light assembly things, like I always say a guitar maker because that sounds really nice. But, there are lots of very light industrial type uses that are compatible with residential in a live-work situation. And so when you read the memos about what what uses might go in here, you see it's fairly broad. So even though the purple color is way out here at the end of 23rd, and those are uses that maybe wouldn't be such great neighbors for residential. We still do have a lot of employment area potentially here, and it will be the market to a large extent that determines how much of that becomes housing, how much of it actually becomes employment, and how much is mixed. So I don't know if that makes you feel any better, Allison.
Your comment about the goldenrod part along 23rd, that was employment.
Oh, this.
No, I think it was just more about the line, vertical line on the west side of the employment area, kind of where that falls.
Described it, but I think it was about topography a lot.
Yeah, it's a serious topography issue there. Yeah.
Well, that particular line, of course, is a property line, so it fell on a property line. However, yes, I mean, there's a lot of topography up here, but admittedly, there is an odd scenario we have here, that we have this employment zone that has trucks that are coming in and out currently today, and we have residential along that. These parts, if I recall correctly, the very hilly part of the southern end of this is not all that well developed out and used. It's also quite hilly in here. So, it's not that sort of standard industrial flatland that you can, put large or small or medium-sized industrial buildings on. I guess it's going to be more of an incremental kind of smaller type of employment.
North-south connections.
Yes, that's right.
That may also develop.
That might be an industrial scenario there as well. So this is a quarter section quarter section that is outside help me with this. It's outside the UGB, but outside the UGB and the city, everything. It's completely out there. And yet we saw this other opportunity for connectivity, and this relates to the industrial question as well. So you see these streets that are being shown across that property. It slopes up, significantly from here down to the stream. And we just saw further opportunity for not only having Lee Street connecting with Foothills Boulevard, but that these upper portions could connect out through. And these are actually even more direct. These residential streets are more direct connections to East Devil's Lake Boulevard. From a land use standpoint, there was a discussion we had that maybe this being, and this is a year ago that I'm trying to remember, so help me, this being so heavily sloped here, perhaps this, and treed, it's forested, maybe this is eventually not used as such, and that replaces that. So perhaps there's this industrial there and there as well then.
It's a tough notion if you are indeed in surplus in employment land, but we should kind of resolve that in the final plan. So from here talking to Mike. So I'm talking to Deb. Talk to you guys. If you have so one of the things where we go from here is with any guidance, any refinements you'd like to see, we'll brief the Planning Commission and City Council in a joint work session on June 5th, and then create the final plan document. And in that final plan document, I'd like to reconcile what we've been thinking about here with your HNA and EOA, housing needs analysis and economic opportunities analysis, your very fundamental elements of your comprehensive plan update, and talk with staff and the project management team about if there is need and or a case to be made to intimate that as an implementation strategy if the city wishes. It does close another gap, if you will, between existing, future Nelson and existing Lincoln City to the north. But there are state land use hurdles to get over around needed, supply and whatnot. But if it's a swap, a swap is a swap, so you're not necessarily adding land. So that's one issue. But I guess I'm looking too for some of the property owners in that Marigold area along 23rd to get back to us. They're really mulling over what that meant for them. But I think at the end of the meeting they were kind of leading towards leaving it residential. Is that right, Bonnie? You were talking to them at some length.
Yeah. So I think that's all I have.
I'm going to have to get on mic here. Thanks, Bonnie.
I think some of the property owners along that Marigold area were interested, who are currently using it as residential use, were curious about the possibility of keeping it as an industrial use, which it's currently county-zoned industrial use, as you all know. But we talked about theoretical property values, and I told them to get actual values, they'd have to talk to a broker. But in general, industrial land is not typically as high value as residential. So they thought that maybe they liked the designation better now. So, yeah.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thanks. I know you were talking to them for a while.
And I think the only,
Councilor Casper, yeah.
yeah, we
Sorry.
didn't hear from.
Neighborhood Association.
Yes.
Brenda Casper.
Well, as I was reading, you were talking about local versus collector streets, and I'm scratching my head and go, okay, now where's the definition? And then I read farther. It talks about more driveways and intersections. So I'm assuming that would also play a pattern in how housing is developed along that pathway.
Yeah.
And then if it were to be changed, streets would have to be reclassified? Is that?
Just some reclassifications, not a tremendous amount in here.
Okay.
Because there's not a lot that's existing here, so it's actually determined kind of a new network. And maybe we should flip forward. I can flip at the power. I'll do that, Bonnie. You don't have to keep flipping here. But here's a street diagram, Judy. So why don't we just review this for a moment? And this has the fine-grained network. In the final plan, we will, for the street network, we'll be removing the alley detail in here. So just to show really what's the essential connector. So, Lawrence, if you could particularly focus on the essential elements of the street diagram.
Yeah. Actually, more than just the alleys. I mean, we have to determine this, and particularly with David, we'll work out what precisely is on the sort of regulating diagram, regulating plan, and then what might be a plan that perhaps shows illustrative suggestions of local streets and alleyways. So the most significant is what we're calling Foothills Boulevard.
And that would be a collector, Judy. We call it a connector in the plan. Just a little bit of a nomenclature change to mean that it's a low-speed, neighborhood-oriented throughway, as opposed to some collectors you think about in larger metropolitan areas. It's a very fundamental piece of infrastructure. Yeah.
And I'm being reminded that Foothills here could be comparable to Coast over on the west side here, both in the way that it connects all the way through. And in Olivia Beach, is the street section we're talking about the same? Yeah, which is 2 travel lanes, 2 on-street parking lanes, a planting strip for trees on both sides, and stormwater management and sidewalks. The green, we're calling queuing streets. That means that they're a little narrower, and when you come up, 2 cars are passing one another, they have to really slow down, make their way by. Sometimes they pull off into the parking lane. So it's a way of really slowing down traffic, making these much more pedestrian-friendly places that you're not speeding on through. The neighborhood connector, you know where the highway is, and then the alleyways. And the alleyways are shown in these blue lines. And alleyways you can go see one over in Olivia Beach, just right over here in these blocks here, which I actually planned for, and we worked with Rich Catlin also from Reese & Associates for Casey Roloff, and Olivia Beach built these out, and the alleyways really work amazingly well because they take all of the driveways off of the street that you typically have in a subdivision. You don't have any of that, cars facing into what they call snout houses with garage doors in the front. All of those garage doors are on the back alley, and you get front porches and attractive fronts of houses facing out to the street. It becomes much more sociable. You can do carriage houses, either attached or detached on the back of those alleyways as a result. Oftentimes builders think, oh, well, that's going to be expensive to have an alleyway and a street. But if your streets are predominantly queuing streets, they're going to be narrower than the typical big, wide suburban street that might have cul-de-sacs in it. So we don't have any cul-de-sacs here, you'll notice. Everything connects to everything else, so it's a network that you can filter through. The alleyways work really beautifully, and you can go see them at Olivia as how they function.
Judy, does that get at your question kind of about the hierarchy? Okay, thanks a bunch. Let's see what else we have, because I think we've just reserved your time. Oh, we have some. We're still okay. Down. Okay, so this is David asked me to remove the car. This is a hand drawing, so just popping out that car out of there isn't quite as easy. But just imagine it's a police car. We'll put some lights on it. So the idea.
I can Photoshop
Right.
if necessary. I can take it out.
So this is the notion of taking advantage of the asset of Baldy Creek, which we know is a fish-bearing stream and a really great potential feature for the kind of Nelscott North, if you will. Lawrence, since this is your artwork, would you like to describe kind of the purpose of the street frontage, how that would function with the parking behind now? And then here's that we do have a little bit of a cross-section on it, but first just the description.
Yeah.
That's right. It's this one 20-foot section. Yeah.
Yeah, so this
Oh, you mean the lower level is confusing, Deb?
Oh, this down here?
Yeah. So really
That
focusing
probably
on the
wouldn't be
paved area, because this would all be paved, paved concrete.
Yeah, and you can actually see a piece of that paved road in front of Charter. So this was, yes, the previous concept in which it would be drivable, but now you simply imagine it without the car there. This probably would appear even a little narrower. And this was shown with mixed-use storefront buildings, ground floor retail, shops or offices up above. It's to be seen how much retail will want to be built there, how much landowners and developers will want to face out to that if they don't actually have the ability to drive a car out in front of it. If it's only something you come around to as a pedestrian, it's kind of open to the market how they would react to that. But on the other hand, it's got visibility. So if people are out here and they feel it's far enough away from the highway that a shop could live here. There could be a sidewalk cafe here, let's say, and not everything are going to be cafes, but that potential is still there. But more than anything, it's this. It's the pathway that would be here and that would be continuous all the way through. And conceivably, a lot of people will be there eventually.
We have, so I'd love the, PAC's feedback on this. Lawrence makes a really important point that these wouldn't necessarily all be retail. For those that are retail, though, we would still probably ask for front and back onto both facing Baldy Creek and 101, as well as onto the parking, so they'd access from the back. That'd probably be their formal front entrance, but also asking that there be front and back entrances, so folks aren't turning their back on the creek, in other words, and facing interior to the neighborhood, but still facing 101. So that's a refinement that's necessary kind of in the iteration of this plan. Welcome.
And we've established the dimension of that block from the first street, parallel street to the highway, or rather to the Baldy Creek, as a full 200-foot block. So it has the room to be able to face buildings both up to the internal street and out to this, and have still parking and an alleyway in the middle of that block. The depth is there, provided.
Welcome, sir, Mr. Price. We are just kind of going around. We've been showing kind of the new diagram. The major essential that you may have seen in the memo is facing perpendicular to the highway in this case, rather than the Baldy Creek slip lane, but a lot of the attributes are the same.
Okay.
And where that local access lane we had envisioned being an actual drivable roadway, right now with this revision, we're thinking of it being a 20-foot wide shared use path and emergency access lane, so emergency vehicles can reach all sides of the building. So we wouldn't, cars wouldn't be normal in there, but that would be, if you can imagine that as a police car, that would be a scenario. All right. Any questions or comments on kind of still keeping this notion alive, and certainly the shared use path, the Head to Bay Trail concept? Still okay? It's not an organizing feature of the plan any longer, but it's still, I think, very viable and consistent with the notion of restoring Baldy Creek and making that walkable, this incredible investment, that the city and ODOT has made in 101, really taking advantage of that walking environment. People, as you know, are already walking it so much more now, and this would just amplify that further for the new neighborhood. I'm going to take that as a full steam ahead. Richard, anything?
This would be an ideal place for bike shops and, energy bar stores. I have been reminded by one of my bike advocacy expert colleagues that there's studies that have been done that show that routes that are primarily retail can actually be improved on certain routes where bike lanes have been put in. It's not only vehicular or pedestrian or transit, but that it's any layer of what brings people by a store, can add to that retail.
I have a question, if I may. I'd love, Lawrence, both you're in the PAC's feedback on this. I might have to borrow your microphone, Lawrence, real quick. So, given your notion earlier, Lawrence, about concentrating kind of the retail and the room on some of these streets in this viewpoint, is it worth somehow indicating that that is the ideal future placement of commercial, where we care more about it? Because right now it's kind of a sea of red. So for future property owners and developers, it's kind of intimate. It wouldn't be required, but from an urban designer's perspective, where you would concentrate your welcoming buildings might be a refinement we would do in this diagram.
Very good point. Yes, it would be prudent of us to put into this plan clearly identifying that that the corners are particularly important because they become the gateway as you're passing by on the highway. That you see two really well placed buildings, identifying this is the entrance to something, and then we could simply do it with an L of heavy black lines at that location, and perhaps that's the only thing is that it would be flexible and maybe move. I was discussing with the folks that own the Morris property here that this might be a great location for another one of those main streets, or this one, but likely not both. This is going to be a signalized intersection, which would identify it as a great retail corner. It's going to have trucks running in and out of it, though, which might be a downside to it being a great main street. But it could flip either way. It could be that this is more of a service road and this is more of a main street, or vice versa. And it might have to do with, how that site plan is laid out. Further study.
I'm reminded of the city-owned property at 32nd, actually, where, in that kind of gateway, the east-west marker on the southeast corner there, that opportunity is a similar opportunity to kind of mark the entrance to the internal neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. So we'll mark that on the plan.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So certainly sort of building off existing NELSCOT, curious, we don't want to forget any other improvements to existing NELSCOT with certainly a lot of the energy here has been kind of platting out what's possible on the east side. And existing NELSCOT is quite built out and successful as it is, but just so that there's, we remember that we're building on the success of that existing node. And there's, great precedent images out of the design charrette from, I think, was it 2008 and around in that 2006? Mm-hmm. Yeah. In that NELSCOT charrette plan of some other concepts that could, help continue to build out existing NELSCOT, the creek area behind the shops, et cetera. And so we might want to pick up some of those ideas into the final plan here with your direction. Allison's given us some ideas on that. Judy, given your perspective with the NELSCOT neighborhood, is there anything else that you'd recommend being picked up from, do we not lose sight of some improvements or attention in the kind of NELSCOT today as we look to NELSCOT of the future?
Well, there's an unnamed creek that we're working on naming called Hoskins Creek. It's behind Beach. It runs out by the Green Onion. There's a waterway there that's, I think it's city-owned, that could be cleaned up.
Could you spell? I get that wrong every time.
Hoskin?
Yeah.
Hoskins.
Thank you.
He's the nephew of Charles Nelson, the founder of NELSCOT.
Great. Okay. I'd love to put that in the plan just to continue to help build the awareness about that. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions, comments from?
I just had a quick
comment,
comment,
please. Yeah.
Because this had changed on the frontage road there, were there any changes or considerations regarding pedestrian crossings there at Highway 101?
It's a very good question. David, you might want to, we have, this is, Pam, you bring up a really good point, because we talk a lot about wanting to unify both sides of the highway, and how do we actually do that with the amount of traffic that goes through there. So with I think it's, the formalized crossings would be at 32nd and 23rd mainly. That's the notion. We had talked about crossing there at the Triangle property, which I don't think we've carried forth that now, because that seems to be kind of a singular, isolated parcel on the east side. So if I'm not mistaken, it would be the formal crossings we'd be encouraging would be at 23rd and 32nd. Does that sound right, David, to you?
On the topic of pedestrian crossings, in addition to the signalized intersection we have at 32nd and the future signalized intersection at 23rd, we also have installed at least one, I believe, rapid flashing beacon, a so-called RRFB, which I believe is in the vicinity of 29th Street. And then the plan doesn't call for any additional specific marked crossings, but that's something that could be pursued as the area develops and as the need manifests itself in the future.
I wasn't aware of the RRSF. RRFB. That's in now. Yeah, we should get a picture of that for the plan. Any other comments, questions? Thanks, Pam. It's a tough one. It's sort of when a highway runs through it. It's a classic here in Nelscott. Gosh, thanks, Lawrence. So I think I'll try and touch on this piece. If you want to help me drive with the up and down keys. Our technical memo 4, you may or may not have poured over these in the packet there. But this memo in particular is very important to ODOT because it's how we make sure our local streets are connecting and playing well with the state system. And it includes they analyze some key intersections within the study area, assess the conditions for walking and biking, identified future transit location, and needed mitigation strategies. I think the diagram, if you go to the next slide, Lawrence. One more. Just the down arrow. He's such an Apple user. Say, how do we get, there you go. What is this PC? Right. So again, looking at some of this, this network, and I think, Judy, too, this is what were you getting at, which are the real collectors that will be hardwired in the future foothills and the existing 23rd, some of that local street network, which would be future. So this is the real skeleton of the diagram. And then the shared use path, super important element here. We'll remove this stub per David's direction in the final plans. And in the future transit stops, I don't think they're identified here, but we certainly are looking at connecting the employment area in the high school with the transit network as this develops out. So we have the transit authority has participated in the PAC in the past and has advised on those locations, and they're in the memo. I think that is the final slide on the transportation analysis section. They looked at basically what they were doing. Okay, well, here we go. So the intersection improvements, for those of you that have your memos with you, there's, the looking at particularly at the 101 and the 23rd. So with the considered build out in this study area, with the jobs and homes that we envision the future here, the one intersection that would be failing is that 23rd in the north coming out of the industrial area. So that's where David referred to it, likely a future signalized intersection there associated with any development that would trigger that level of intersection. The street functional classification hierarchy, I just went over that on the kind of the screen, but it goes to maintaining the classification of 23rd, reclassify 23rd within the industrial east as a local street, and then classify Southeast Foothills Boulevard as a collector, and that would line it up for state funding if needed. And then classify 32nd from 101 to Fleet Street as a collector, and then designate all the remaining as local streets. So certainly an emphasis on walking and biking in the study area, the sidewalks and bikeways, the associated trails, and street crossings that Pam was just mentioning. So the, Table 4 in that technical memo includes, I'm not sure if I have a section on that could you scroll down one slide, Lawrence? Yeah, I don't think I have a slide on that on page 14 of the recommended transportation improvements. They are carried over into our funding strategies memo. And then the conclusion of this technical memo 4 includes the number of transportation system plan improvements that would be triggered by the adoption of this plan, so that when we take this plan through Planning Commission and City Council hearings, you'd be probably accepting this plan, I guess, by resolution. It depends on how you do it in Lincoln City. And then when you go to implement, then you would be also changing some of your transportation system plan designations in the comprehensive plan. Questions or comments on Tech Memo 4? Rich, anything that's important you think is to point out here besides what's in the memo? Okay, thanks. Sort of our proxy for a couple comments here. First, Allison, and I'll run my mic back to David.
On the lower part where there's that kind of rectangular shape, and then it shows a dotted line to connect to 32nd. I don't know, so that dotted line I think is that dune. So we did a poll a few years ago of those residents, and they were not in favor of extending dune. There's quite a bit of topographic drop there, and I think it's good to show connection, but I just didn't see a blurb on any background on it, and I don't know how it needs to connect with the TSP, but it sounds to me like that's not a very high priority, if possible at all. I think that would be probably best, but.
Noting the difference, and there's a significant difference in elevation there as well, and so it'd be relatively costly to build as well. Thanks, David, please.
Yeah, I wanted to address one of the major findings of the transportation analysis that is very familiar to those of us that do this all the time, but might be news to those of you who are checking in periodically. And the finding is this: congestion is going to get worse, and we don't have a plan to fix it. The congestion in this part of the highway is going to exceed our mobility target for these types of highways here in the planning horizon, which is over the next 20 years. The reason that we don't have a plan to fix it is that in general the plan to fix congestion is to add capacity, but that is very expensive. We don't have the funding to add capacity everywhere on US 101 in order to meet demand, as well as, even if we did have the funding, it would have substantial environmental impacts, not only on the natural environment, for example, Baldy Creek here, but on the built environment as well. In other areas of Lincoln City, as you know, there's no room to expand the highway without impacting the adjacent buildings. And this is not an uncommon situation. This is actually the situation all over Oregon, and particularly in coastal communities. And it's exacerbated on the coast because you have high levels of traffic demand in the summer, and our mobility targets are based on the 30th highest hour, which would be during that summer peak. So for these reasons, our planning path out of that situation is that over the past few years, we have adopted rules that allow us to allows our Transportation Commission to adopt an alternative mobility target. So rather than trying to meet a mobility target at the 30th highest hour, we can change the target period for when we're trying to meet that. And for example, for this section of highway in Lincoln City, I believe that we have recommended an alternative mobility target that looks at average weekday traffic rather than your 30th highest hour. So that is an alternative standard that we believe that we can meet. And so your transportation system plan that was recently adopted includes the recommendation for an alternative mobility target. I don't believe that that has been taken to our Transportation Commission yet. And our NELSCOT refinement plan will recommend extending that alternative mobility target to include this portion of US 101 and the affected intersections, particularly at 23rd Street.
How does that trigger that action at the OTC? How does that usually come up to be? When should that be approached?
That happens after a local jurisdiction adopts a plan that calls for an alternative mobility target. Then we, ODOT staff, will put that on the agenda of the OTC and bring that up. And we actually have several alternative mobility target considerations around the state that we're waiting to package up, take to the OTC all at once, and Lincoln City will be included in that.
So don't forget us. If we don't come to you first, you'll remember us when that package comes forward. Okay, thank you. All right, any questions about that? I'm not news to you guys. I know you went through a long process deciding about what to do on 101, but still on track and familiar? Okay, great. Okay, Lawrence, Mr. Kamara, if you don't mind pushing the down key. Thank you. One more. One more. All right. So we're into planning level cost estimates, and I really am glad that Rich is here because he's a subject matter expert here, worked on this memo with DJ Heffernan, and it deals with funding and financing as well as existing sources and potential new sources. So I think it's probably fair to say that a lot of the improvements in here are development driven and and sometimes in partnership with the city, but no one, as you know, is sitting on a big budget surplus to start to build out the new NELSCOT plan. Could I go to the next slide, please, Lawrence? Thanks. So this is the table. David has asked me for one change in here. This is in the memo, and it's not unlike one you saw at this time last year when we were with you before. The first item should be relabeled multi-use path / emergency access lane, since that's that shared use path along Baldy Creek. And just a number of the transportation improvements here that are identified in the plan. The water system improvement, we know that there's parts of the study area that aren't currently served and no immediate solution to serve in Zone 3. Sewer system improvement, and then some parks improvement. As I mentioned, that Central Green is kind of the one identified, and there's various kind of incremental open space area that would be either just left to nature as development occurs associated with natural resource infrastructure, and then the Baldy Creek enhancements. And we've mentioned some of the sources here on the right. I'll just spell out some of the acronym system development charges, or the SDCs, which is the pool of funds that the city can pair in public-private partnership with some of the development, subject to certain restrictions. Oregon Department of Transportation, perhaps for some active transportation links with the Head to Bay Trail. So SDCs and utility funds, with Lila and Rich being more expert on those if you have questions. Sewer bonds are a possibility, and then just certainly utility rates funding some of these improvements on the sewer side. And in parks, again, system development charge contribution with development agreement with the private property owners. And there's this notion about, with the open space areas, possibly transfer development rights, which I don't think is enabled in the current comprehensive plan, but could be in the future, where if a certain property is particularly impacted by natural resources constraint, there might be some transfer development either on-site or to another area to sort of compensate that private property owner for providing the public service of retaining that natural feature in perpetuity. And then the Baldy Creek enhancements there, that last one, we're looking at ODOT mitigation funds on that potentially, watershed enhancement grants and others. And I know that Lila and her team are thinking about that over time. We have a couple of experts, as I mentioned, Lila and Rich in the room. If you have any questions about this, remember this is a 20-year plan, so it's kind of a complex package of funding strategies to build it out in its entirety. Any questions, comments? This is why we rely on the experts of this in public works and engineering to help build out our city well. And they have reviewed the funding sources in this memo, and I think they found them deficient, so it seems that it's on a pretty stable track to advance towards Planning Commission and Council with this current table and suite of funding strategies. But if we have missed anything or if anything seems out of place, please let us know. Lila, anything has changed or anything to add from your perspective? Happy to run the mic over to you. Thank you for participating in this from beginning to end here.
Certainly. I think we've covered everything there over all of our meetings. The new plan, the new design, I think, is really going to work well with improvements to Baldy Creek, more so probably than the road would have. So really in favor of that part of the new plan. So
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a bunch. PAC members, any questions or comments on the suite of funding strategies? Okay. It does not all happen at once. We know that. Rich, any commentary from your perspective? Thank you.
Yeah, a question that commonly comes up is, I've got property that I want to develop. What assistance can the city give me to develop that property? This plan, there's no specific order of development for this plan, but it's safe to assume that as much as you can start developing the plan from the highway and going east, that would be a logical extension of water, sewer, streets, storm drainage, and that kind of thing. But what if you're not that property owner? What if you're the next one over or the next one over and you're ready to go, but there's intervening properties in the way? Then how does that distant property owner overcome that distance? Can they get the cooperation of the property owners in the middle? Can the city offer assistance? Those are usually the challenging instances where the suite of funding sources comes into strong play, because the city may be asked to advance, say, sewer SDC funds or water SDC funds in advance of whatever's planned in the capital program in order to accommodate a developer. So there's a lot of flexibility in how this can be used. There's a lot of give and take between the private developer and the city. So this doesn't necessarily say this is how it has to be done. These are options that are available, and they're really utilized on a case-by-case basis.
All right. Anything else? Last call on 5. Riveting, I know. It's always, long-range planning is a long haul. It's not a quick thing. So Tech Memo 6, Lawrence, thanks for helping us here. Oh, here's the water zone. So I think that in the, we probably should reconcile this with the new plan diagram in the final. I'm not sure how hard that would be, Rich, but the base map on this was just noticed was on our previous plan diagram, just to chew those up. But zones, 2, the bulk of zone 2 being served now, some just question marks about zone 3, and as Rich mentioned, is that's ready to go, and some of our properties to kind of bridge zone 2 and 3 to encourage active discussion with the city on solutions on how to bring water service to those eastern areas. All right, Tech Memo 5, I think, called last call on that. So Tech Memo 6, please. Lawrence, thanks. So this one deals with kind of how to implement from a built environment perspective. So from a vertical plane, what does it look like on the ground? What code and implementation measures do we recommend the city consider as they advance the plan through not just accepting the plan, but then also codifying it in a comprehensive plan and code and doing the annexations to bring some of these properties in? I love always Lawrence's explanation on street design and why certain design choices are made for the vibrancy and livability of the area. Financing incentives, there's another section on this. It's a little bit duplicative with number 5, the investments, and then a qualitative assessment at the end of what parts of the plan are more, politically feasible than others. And we've tried to craft a plan that is politically feasible. So at the end of the day, it looks all pretty, green light from our perspective, just because we've gone through the due diligence of removing those things that would be a regulatory red flag. So next slide, please, Lawrence. This is, and do folks have, Deb, did you hand out both copies? Did folks have copies of Tech Memo 6 now? Of Tech Memo 6 up there? Okay, great. So this is, of course, my personal favorite Tech Memo because it's planning. We don't need to spend as much time on it, though, as I might be tempted to do. But so the plan policies, if we could just walk through it for a moment. You have the land use and transportation diagram on page 2 there. And I think in the final plan, as we say, make sure ODOT and the city are both comfortable with it, but we feel there's merit in showing both the kind of detailed plan as that we call it the illustrative plan, as well as the land use and transportation diagram, which is the one that has more open space, sort of more creativity, less specifics, and then also with a change to this diagram to kind of put a fine point on where we would encourage the commercial located in that diagram. So in this memo, we get back to the vision for the plan, the goals of livability and housing, rec health, transportation choice, lifelong learning, heritage and economy. On page 3 there. On 4, so these are some plan policies. This would be a new section. Now, we don't know how the city will choose to update its comprehensive plan. It's kind of in the process of updating some of the major technical work, transportation system plan, parks plan, housing plan, economics plan, and then at some point probably a full, comprehensive update of the plan itself. If you keep specific sections, geographic sections, these are some specific policies that we suggest apply to the Nelscott area. So it just, underscores creating this walkable mixed-use district. We tend to use the term residents instead of citizens. Creating architectural and design standards that reflect and build upon the Nelscott Plan District zoning. So really taking a page from the historic architectural character of existing Nelscott and carrying that over to East Nelscott, if you will, or the Nelscott Gap area. Building on the Nelscott Community Vision Plan for roofs, facades, chimneys, textures, and landscape materials. You did a lot of work on that in 2006, so we recommend carrying those forward. Prioritizing, incentivizing construction of workforce housing for individuals and families, and I need to true those up now with the comp plan policies that have come forth of the housing needs analysis. A year ago, you hadn't done that work yet, so we're building on your existing kind of needed housing study. Recreation and health, just some more plan policies there, including with heritage. There's this one particular notion. I think several of you were involved with the workshop and the design charrette that we were fortunate to have been able to run right from the Nelscott community. And James Rojas came to town and was doing some, found object, creative design work with us all, and including with some students. And some of one of those touching things when this, you think these, youth are disconnected and they don't care, but there's the most beautiful thing that some of the high school students mentioned, so we've carried it forward here. It's HE number 2, and it's to create formal and informal places in the project area for learning and discovery, for example, for Siletz and Lincoln County history. So even these kids were like, they just want to, as they're moving around through the area, they'd like to just see some markers and some interpretive areas. I thought that was really sweet. So that's included as a plan policy. You have some for economy there. Create opportunities for limited but essential basic goods within the quarter-mile and half-mile distances of most residents. So the notion there is being able to walk to services and not always to have to use the car, which we're not saying we don't want to drive, but we're learning more and more about how to design healthy communities, and that's a part of it. Create specific implementation strategies and spaces to promote innovation, light manufacturing, and employment in Nelscott, and Deb was getting to a little bit of that earlier. So to encourage that. In the memo, Lawrence has one of the best articulations of how how the best practices in planning is evolving from what we were doing in the turn of the 20th century, when Euclidean zoning was very popular. So the separation of uses of, for example, noxious uses in industrial areas, separating from housing. So that was early 1900s innovation. And so what we found, though, learning over the last 100 years, is that caused us to, with the onset of the automobile, is to be driving a lot. We know that has environmental impacts as well as health and social impacts. So the notion here is to really mix those design types more. Lawrence was talking about that earlier, about providing, and Deb too, a mix of employment and housing opportunities, which seems to be just a healthier way to go. And people can live and work in the same space and not have to travel. So to enable that in the code, maker spaces is a notion that's popular. In transportation choice, we've covered this on page 6 quite a bit. But designing streets for people as well as automobiles, so these are really pages from Lawrence's book, and pay particular attention to the design for vulnerable population, including seniors and people with disabilities. you know is far better than we, but we understand what pride and enjoyment people in Nelscott take in walking. So making sure those are safe paths and enjoyable paths. To design street with minimum lanes and lane widths necessary to minimize cost and to encourage slower speeds for safety, thinking of the families and children and seniors that we all want to be living in these places. And I won't go through every transportation policy there. You have them in front of you. If you have any specific suggestions, we appreciate that, but these would be kind of your guidelines by which you would evaluate future development. So plan policies to become enforceable if the city wishes to codify within them. So these would be your overarching principles for regulating development within the Nelscott plan should you wish. We have lifelong learning, so supporting opportunities for passive and active learning in the Nelscott district as a whole. I know that Councillor Hinton has been strong on bringing art into the community, connecting residents to artistic and theater assets, recognizing the unique nature of arts and culture within Nelscott today. We've talked about on page 7 the ecology and natural resources, so restoring those natural assets, including Baldy Creek in particular, but designing houses with coastal ecology in mind, given topography, street frontage, wind, solar access, and rain. PAC members in the past have reminded us about weather and wind, and the notion, too, of are there internal rooms with awnings and canopies that can be used to provide, an outdoor environment when it's, windy but not cold necessarily, and still allow for businesses to operate outside. So that's a lot. Those are the plan policy sections. So we're really very specific about combing through the goals of this plan vis-a-vis your existing comprehensive plan. So those are the gaps we see you could close should you wish when you adopt this plan. And then the code and implementation measures. We have an updated buildable lands inventory now, so we can update this section in the final document. We do, Steve tells me that we have a surplus in employment and residential here, but I want to kind of explain and deepen that here in the section beginning page 7. And then here's Lawrence's introduction into the difference between traditional implementation measures and to a transition to form-based coding. So the notion here is regulating the look of the building and how it relates to the pedestrian, to the human environment, as opposed to what's in it, which is more the Euclidean form of zoning. So a couple of really good pages on that. The notion of a transect and transitioning from more intense social and economic interactions to more rural nature as you go up the hill. And then the orientation to the on page 11, the 4 zoning types here, horizontal and vertical mixed-use development, the village community, the hillside residential, and the employment district, with Lawrence having articulated 3 fundamental standard elements that define each zone. And I'm not sure I have any of this in PowerPoint, Lawrence, that you could actually speak to, but let's go forward just a minute and see. So this is right there. If you want to just give an overview, if you would, Lawrence, on how the city can attend to these kind of 3 types of detail as they would move towards a form-based code.
Yeah, I'll start. So building standards, architectural standards, and landscape. And in this notion of a form-based code, it's less dependent, as Kirsten was saying, on the use, the separation and segregation of uses that was part of that Euclidean approach, that various uses can happen within certain building types. So a form-based code is more defining a building type. And that means, imagine a storefront mixed-use building with ground floor retail, apartments up above. Might have a flat roof, might have a pitched roof. Doesn't matter that much, but it has a certain mass to it, and it has an orientation to the street. Compare that to a single-family house, a very different animal. But you could also have different uses in a single-family house than just residential. You could have a workshop or an office or a little cafe spilling out of the front of a house. We often see houses that have a little shop added to the front of it. So you can articulate those sort of things in different types of buildings, and a form-based code identifies those. Architectural standards, however, get more into the materials, the components of a building. without going into great detail. And then landscape is a critical thing that we forget all too often about, how the landscape really can pull together and hold together a great streetscape, or not. Sometimes without any attention to the landscape, buildings can be terrific, but the way that it's all fit together, knitted together, defining the public and the private space, perhaps with a fence or a hedge or a wall between the sidewalk and the front yard, it means all the difference. And that's part of landscape, those elements, as well as the actual plant matters and the trees and the canopies. So these just lay out some basic parameters for those three levels.
I was struck being able to stay in one of Lawrence's, design buildings in Olivia Beach when we were here last year. And I was amazed at the different types of vegetation that can grow in your, was it 2-foot strip?
Sometimes it's narrow, bare minimum about 2 feet.
It's amazing. These are trees above my head, So if chosen correctly, you can do a lot with just a very narrow strip. But the attention to that detail is really, seems to be paying off well in Olivia Beach. So there's pages and pages on that by each zone in your tech memo. These are ideas for the comprehensive plan update. If and as you wish to code for this in the new NELSCA, these would be, Lawrence's recommendations. And he tried to, I think, keep in mind affordability, because we're, trying to find a sweet spot between great design that people of all income levels deserve, as well as being able to deliver an affordable product. So thanks for your work. And if you see anything there that you have comments on, we'd take those now. Any questions or comments in that section? I know Deb's been over it in detail. It's been a while, but she's been over it in detail. Anything in the form-based section? If not, I might ask Lawrence to just speak to a little bit to street design. You have the hierarchy here in this memo. You can use this as your cheat sheet, if you will, but this section in the memo starts with, I believe it starts with connector and then goes down from there. So I went over this, we went over this in broad brush strokes earlier, but this is kind of how you'd then code for it, yeah. And you might have to use your memo to address the pack on this, yeah.
Well, we don't have the actual street section. Is that right in this? Okay. So this was Foothills. Thank you. Two options. We're dealing with a slope here, as you can see very clearly in the drawing. So we're anticipating that the houses on one side of the street are going to be higher than on the other side. And well, sometimes houses can be down below the street. It's usually nice on the downhill side to at least be even with the street. But there are really wonderful neighborhoods where you're on a slope and the house above the street can sit quite high at times. But these are very, standard, a straightforward type of a street. This is not considered a skinny or a queuing street with 10-foot travel lanes, 7-foot parking lanes. The parking is a really important element, as on-street parking all around. Parking lane, that parked car, be it on a commercial street or on a residential street, again, slows the traffic. Every car that is parked on the street next to the travel lane is one less car that needs to be parked up on private land. And that's a critical idea. Sometimes I hear people say, why are we using public pavement, public street right-of-way for parking private vehicles? Sort of anti-car driving way of thinking. And hey, I'm just as critical as about how many cars we have in our world and all of that. That can go off on a rant about that. But we have cars in our world, and we need places to put them. Park them on the street. They're a great place. The bike lane is shown in the upper as an 8-foot bike lane that is not next to the travel lane, but is on the outside of the parked cars. Now that's we call this a cycle track, and you see a lot more increasingly in places like Portland and Seattle, and some of the most advanced bicycle network designers are now flipping the car and the bike lane. Reason being that when you put a bike lane next to the travel lane and next to the car, the parked car, you're just really effectively widening the travel space. Even though there's a painted line there, If you don't see anybody biking in that bike lane, you tend to speed up because there's just less to possibly bang your car into. When you've got a narrower space, people are careful about their own car. And then a 5-foot tree lane, planting strip, that can be narrow, that can be wider. Rarely should it be much narrower, although, as you were just mentioning, we have it a little narrower on some very tight streets that we had in Olivia. And then a 6-foot walk. So anyone can spill out through their picket fence from the front porch. The second option is combining the bike lane and the sidewalk into 12-foot shared walk-bike ways. And that is something actually we've seen a lot in, increasingly in actually a trip that I did to Europe back a couple years ago. In Berlin, all over the streets of Berlin, they actually put the sidewalk and the bike lane next to one another. And it takes a little bit getting used to. Pedestrians and cyclists have to know how to sort of live together, work together. But it's a nice option. It's a shared space.
Wide enough to accommodate a bike and
a bike and a pedestrian. Side by side in 12 feet. And you just have to have a little demarcation. You don't want to paint big lines. Sometimes it could just be a paving line in the middle of the sidewalk that identifies their two sides to it. Talked about alleys before. 20-foot right of way, 12 feet of pavement in the middle, gravel shoulders, compacted for being able to drive a fire truck onto if you need to.
We will update this section. Obviously, there wouldn't be the parking in the Baldy Creek emergency access lane, so we'll be replacing with the cross section I showed you earlier in the PowerPoint there on page 19. So on financing incentives, DJ Heffernan was quite taken with this notion of workforce housing, understanding your need. I know there's quite a bit of attention to it in the housing needs analysis. You could consider an inclusionary zoning overlay program. We're not sure that's the only tool. I think it's 25. I think it's, how many units do you remember, Bonnie? There's a high threshold. I think it's possibly consider this a placeholder, 50 units or more if you're building 50 units or more in Oregon. What is it? Is it 20? 20. So I have a feeling, thank you, I have a feeling that we're seeing a lot of 19-unit developments now in the city of Portland region. So it's probably the right thing from a planning perspective to bring that tool back as a tool for local governments and Oregonians, but the way it was passed by the legislature, it's on for developments 20 units and larger. So thanks for the correction. So in your market, I'm not sure how many developments you would have 20 units or more, but you could contemplate an inclusionary overlay. Just be aware you might get a lot of 19-unit developments with that. And then I mentioned the development rights transfer program earlier here. This area could ostensibly be a receiving zone for some properties that we know are within the tsunami zone on the west side. So it's a potential. Public facility improvements, we went through this a little bit earlier, I won't belabor this much, but the water system refinement plan, we know there's some work to be updated there. And then the sewer system refinement plan also, I believe, is pending and not complete at this time. Some more work on the Head to Bay Trail emergency access lane design. So that would be an implementation strategy. Look for perhaps some grant funding to do that. And then just our qualitative assessment of the accessibility and the effectiveness of these measures. So using design standards, system development charge deferrals as a incentive for certain development types in terms of affordable housing, transfer development right programs, inclusionary zoning, public facility investments, and the sewer and master plan refinement for crossing of Baldy Creek, an element that I know Lila has in mind in the head to main trail emergency access design, as well as the plan area specific street cross sections. So I think we need to probably do a cross section for each of the design types we're thinking about in this plan, so people don't have to wonder later, what does a queuing street look like? You know, what does we have the connector in there now, but what does the alleyway and the local street cross section look like? So we should probably include that. Anything else from your perspective that would be helpful for the city as we look toward delivering a final full plan document based on this with your green light? If not, and if you do have something you think about as you're driving around or working or walking around the next few days, please do be in touch with Deb if that's okay. With this, I think we'd look forward to perhaps final questions and comments. We might go around once more and start with Mr. Price on this side again. We started with Pam on the last time, but just your level of comfort moving from the technical memos into a final plan. We'd be presenting this with, if you're willing to make a recommendation on this to Planning Commission and City Council, we'll be with them on June 5th and would appreciate a recommendation. But if not, we'd just appreciate any of the concerns you'd have or other issues you'd like to see addressed. So, closing comments, Mr. Price, will you start us off?
Well, first I'd like to apologize for being late. I just had too many meetings in one evening. But from the beginning, I've really been impressed with this process, and once upon a time, I remember worrying about the long time frame you've talked about many times, even this evening, and it's sometimes hard to wrap your head around. When you line out the sources of revenue and partners for the various transportation plans and water plans and sewer and all of that, it seems daunting to the point that. Is this an exercise in futility? And I would state that no, it's not. And not only was I at the Design Charrettes in 2006 in Nelscott, but I was able to. I still have a Village of Taft redevelopment T-shirt from the Charrettes in Taft before Taft was redeveloped. And so when the community comes together and really gets about planning, and of course Olivia Beach seemed to happen even much faster than that. And so great things can happen, and I'm really bullish about this. It would be wonderful if we could build these connector streets before the eclipse. If we could get on that, that would be very helpful. It would also help those east property owners you were talking about. But let's assume that's not going to happen. But no, I think it's great work, and I look forward to recommending it move forward.
Well, I've been here the 2 years. And it went fast, but I like it, and I look forward to the infrastructure to start with the sewer and the water, basically, because it's the the bone of everything. So I'm looking forward to seeing it go on.
I like Dave mentioned, I'm also excited about the connectors. I find myself in other cities envying their grid network. So any movement to more transportation choices, I think, is better. So yeah, I would recommend it. Go forward. Mm-hmm.
That's a lot to ask on your first night.
That's okay. I love the fact, like Allison, that there are some other connectors and other byways to alleviate the traffic. That's huge, I think. And I love the fact that you're bringing in the whole community farther down from the Nelscott Strip, trying to connect both sides of the highway, looking at all of the options. I think that's definitely what we need, and more walkability, bikeability along there as well. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it.
I have to ditto the comments regarding the transportation. Anything we can do to help the capacity on Highway 101 for the greater community is a good thing. Making those connections, I think this will lead towards a beautiful, livable, and hopefully affordable community, a neighborhood, not just housing, but a neighborhood for people that reside in the community. And I look forward to seeing this happen.
So stick around. Thank you. We need to all be together, pushing and pulling together to get it to happen. Thank you all so much, and thanks for sticking with us and having the long patience. Please, Seb, if you'd like to add some comments and then close us out. Anyone? Do we have the counselors? Any comments? What do you think?
Thank you. I guess I'll see this later, but it's nice to see the updates as we go along, so I appreciate being included because it gives me plenty of time to think about it. I'm pleased from the prospect of seeing bare land be developed and enhanced for the city's benefit and the citizens. My concerns are always around the financing of such a venture and the overall impact that it would have on existing citizens prior to the full development as we ramp up and build war chests to do it. But I know we can balance that, and we'll balance that. So I appreciate the work of the committee and staff. It's very reflective of, I think, a real positive nature for Lincoln City.
I thought that maybe Dick was going to mention, he was asking me about the two connectors that go through outside the UGB. And it seems to me in one of your illustrations you showed that as a continuation of collector streets. In other illustrations you're showing it as a queuing street. So that's something maybe we could take a look at before we bring it back to the Council and the Planning Commission. And I just want to say, to wrap up this meeting, that I think that I want to say that these consultants have been just excellent to work with. They have been very responsive as we've worked through the process and run into various roadblocks, so to speak. They have been nimble, sort of, in coming up with alternatives for us, and I really appreciate their drive to push through on this project after it got waylaid a little bit, and I think it is a great project. I know that we do have some existing pearls in our city, and the question of, why are we looking at a different neighborhood? We do have some threats, such as tsunami, that could change our city drastically, and it's good to be looking at various other options for development if we need to. And also, because we do have this definite need for affordable housing, this is an area of town where it could become a very walkable, which also feeds into the affordability. It's not just the cost of your house, but what's required in terms of having a car or having a second car, or being able to walk the kids to school as opposed to having to drive. So that all enters in when you're talking about affordable living. So, in short, I really appreciate the work of the committee. It was a little bit longer project than we anticipated, but your input has been very valuable, and appreciate you all. Thank you.
I agree with Deb.
Next step on this is June 5th, then, with your recommendation. Thank you very much. We'll present this to Planning Commission and Council. So it's Councilor Casper. We'll see you again. And if you have any questions, comments, please get them to Deb. And after PC and Council, then we'd move forward into the adoption process this summer. And I think David has reminded me the grant finally runs out and cannot be extended past September, so we'll be wrapping up by that time, for real this time. So thank you all. It's been a great pleasure to work with and for you, and I'll see you on June 5th and perhaps forever after in Lincoln City. Thank you all for your service, and I think with that we're adjourned. All right, take care. Thank you.